Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the School Safety Free Period. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
And we're with the Educators School Safety Network. And for a second there, I thought I said that I'm Amy Klinger, which we could do to really mess with the people who are joining us on the podcast only. Although I would think if you listen to the podcast at this point, you recognize our voices. But, you know, who could say? That would be a mean trick to play.
Okay.
So this week we want to talk a little bit about...
You didn't say anything like it's the school safety free period. This is the time when we meet and talk informally, just like you do in your free period. I'll do the heavy lifting for you today.
So this week we want to talk a little bit about the week that was. I know a lot of schools are getting back to school, and I know that because we were doing a lot of back to school opening professional development for a lot of different schools and school districts that wanted to set the tone for their school year with a positive, empowering message about school safety, not scaring people straight about the risk of awful violence, but an empowering message about all the things that they can do this year.
And I wanted to call it Back to School Freak Out, but as you can see from the title, I lost that one.
Because there's no reason to freak out. I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer, because there's no reason to freak out.
But everyone, let's be real. Everyone has that tiny little bit of a freak out, like, oh my God, it's the end of August. Where did the summer go? I didn't do any of the things I thought I was going to do. I didn't fix any of the lesson plans I was going to do. I didn't clean any of the things I was going to clean or sort any of the closets. So there is a little bit of that freak out. And then there's the little bit of the freak out of like walking into an empty classroom and going, what am I supposed to do? How are we supposed to do this? Or the little bit of the freak out of looking at the professional development schedule and going, I have no time to work in my room. We're going to spend all of our time in the auditorium listening to somebody that we don't even want to hear from. So there is a little bit of a freak out. I guess I'm just speaking from personal experience. Maybe I'm projecting my personal experience onto the listeners.
Well, I think my concern was there's really, in terms of school safety, there is no reason to have a freak out because as we talk about all the time on this podcast and in the professional development that we do, there's so much that educators can do to work to prevent violence in schools, to sharpen the tools, the professional skills that you have in the toolbox. So in the sense of school safety, there's no reason to freak out. So that's why we ended up with professional development bingo. And the reason that we were talking about that is...
No, it's back to school bingo. It's more alliterative.
Oh, you can't see the screen where it says professional development bingo. Do you want me to change it to be back?
I like back to school bingo.
Right,
so now you're going to have to put a line through it and put in a new name.
I'm updating it right now through the wonders of technology.
Good.
So we were talking about some social media posts where teachers were very astutely... teachers, I feel like, have the most astute criticism, other than perhaps the writers and the writers' strike. I think teachers are at least... number two, if not number one, in terms of very astute criticism of awful back-to-school professional development that you've been to, which is...
Not necessarily awful, but very predictive, very much what you could almost anticipate what it's going to be. And so, yeah, those were very funny of people that created sort of this bingo based on bitter experience or past experience of you're always going to have professional development that is supposedly so relevant, and yet there's nothing that's actually mentioning what you do in your teaching world. Or, it's an expert, but yet they've never been in a classroom. Or it's going to be interactive, and then they lecture at you for an hour and a half. Or it's going to be relevant, and it's someone, using PowerPoint from, 1998 with the graphics that go zoom, 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 zoom out, or something like that. So they were pretty spot on in my experience.
Yeah, I think the presenter reads long lists of things off of their slides directly. Yes. I think those are pretty good ones.
Or the PowerPoint slide has 2 columns of bulleted items.
or the presenter says good morning, and then everybody says good morning. They go, I know you can do it louder than that. Good morning. And
that's the worst. That's the worst.
Yeah, I
don't understand that thinking that if you're screaming at me, somehow that's better. I don't get that.
I would just like to state for the record, when we do professional development for educators, not one time, never, not one time have we ever demanded a more vigorous or robust good morning from people. So
actually, none of the things we just said, we wouldn't get a bingo on any of those
I would
because we
say
don't do any of
the
them.
closest would be that I have never taught in a K-12 capacity.
Well,
but we have
true.
you, so it's okay.
But I pick up the slack for you, so it's okay.
Go. So,
but I think the bingo analogy kind of holds, but we thought we would try to turn it into maybe a little more positive kind of bingo of some things that we observed or that we talked about this week in our professional development experiences out in the field with teachers, but also in some of the things that I mentioned in the freak out of, looking at your room and going, what should I be doing? Looking at your professional development and saying, how come there's nothing about safety? So there's a lot of things that we can do. So maybe we're going to give you kind of a positive bingo card instead.
Sure. Do you want to start?
I do.
Okay.
So I think one of them is the whole situational awareness sort of bingo card. Many of you probably are either in a different building or in a different classroom, or something has changed in your building since you were there, remodeling wise, reassignment wise, something is different. And even if it's not, this is still a good bingo square to take a little bit of a look around to refresh your memory of what you have about you, as in, where is the AED? Where are the pull stations for a fire? Where are the fire extinguishers? Where are those emergency exits? Where are the different things that you might need to access?
Where could you shelter from severe weather?
I'm sorry?
Where could you shelter from severe weather? Even if my prescribed exact spot for, for a tornado drill, what if severe weather hits when I'm on the opposite side of the school? Like, being aware of that as well.
So there's one square for you. The other one is the communication square. Taking a look at, can I hear the PA? Do I have the PA call button? Is it available? Or the phone? Is it consistently placed? Do I have stuff over it? Is it buried? Am I supposed to carry a radio? And if so, where is it? Or is my communication default device my phone? And if so, have I bought pants that have pockets in them so that I can carry that device with me? So really kind of taking a look at the communication piece of both two-way communication, one-way communication to get information, and then also the ability to send information. So that's another square, is taking a look at the communication piece.
Mine, which I don't know that I think that the analogy of this as a bingo square necessarily holds, but the thing that jumped out at me from the last week of being in schools and working with folks who are getting back to school and doing that back to school PD was a number of people came up to us and said about that that they had this palpable sense of relief after we did the presentation, because at the beginning, beforehand, they thought it was going to be awful, terrible, scary, talking only about horrific violence, and it was going to be very intimidating and sort of, like a horror show of all of the things that they're concerned about. And then in actuality, the professional development we did, we talked about how would we respond in that, statistically rare case of the worst case scenario. But we talked a lot about all of the other things that they can do all day, every day, like what you mentioned of of a scavenger hunt, of finding all of the AEDs and the fire extinguishers and finding all of those things. That feels really powerful and really empowering for people. And so
proactive.
Yeah, and so that was really wonderful. And actually, we did one PD specifically where it was a bunch of new hires to a district that we've worked with a bunch. And we kind of heard after the fact from a student that we had in class, so who was aware of what the PD was going to be and knew that there was no reason to be afraid. And she was telling her colleagues who were in a little bit of a panic of, we don't want a safety training. Oh gosh, it's going to be awful. And she was telling them, no, I know what it is. It's going to be great. There's no reason to be afraid. And it made me really feel that there's a lot of people who do get professional development about school safety that is scary and traumatic. and they don't learn a ton of skills or capabilities at the end. And so it made me really hopeful for the work that we're doing, and school districts that are taking a reasonable, proactive, empowering approach to this. But it was a sort of that stark reminder of that is not always the case. That is not always the default position.
And I mean, think about that. What if you started every new year, every job, or every new week of your work with someone screaming at you or telling you about how awful something is going to be to try to get you to be, you use the term scared straight. I mean, that's sort of like if you got on an airplane and the safety demonstration was not, here's the things that you can do, here's how we're going to keep you safe. But instead, the safety demonstration was footage of plane crashes and lots of pictures of wrecked planes and people, desperately trying to survive a plane crash. Doesn't make you feel like you're going to know what to do, but it certainly scares you into going, I don't really want to be here in this thing because it sounds really dangerous. And so I think well-meaning, we may decide that we want to make sure that people take this seriously. And in reality, we're really actually making them avoid it or shut down and not want to actually deal with it at all.
And it's especially troubling. We're in the middle of like a historic shortage of professional educators. We've never before needed well capable professional educators more, coming out of the pandemic. And to me, it seems like an unforced error on the part of the educational system we're desperately needing good people, and we are needlessly scaring people, out of this profession. So that's kind of tough.
So that's your kind of Debbie Downer bingo square. But yes, I think that makes sense of professional development that empowers, not intimidates, to use our verbiage. My other bingo square would be the whole idea of setting up your room, and in terms of looking at it from the perspective not of, is this a Pinterest worthy environment, but rather from the perspective of, have I made the flow of this room acceptable and easy so that I've not created evacuation hazards. And we see a lot of rooms where there's only one exit. And so the mailboxes or the cubbies are right there, and the word wall is right there, and they have a big tall bookcase right there. And so we inadvertently create these choke points that make it difficult for 25 little guys to get out of there, because we've made this funnel as opposed to being able to have people move around much better.
And I want to ask a question for you, because I feel like this is a thing that you talk a lot about when we're doing professional development, and it's not really the time to get into a deeper conversation about it. I think this is the time. You, I think, always formulate it as if having having an Instagram or a Pinterest worthy classroom is fundamentally at odds with having a classroom that is designed for school safety. And I don't think that's what you mean. I think it is when I only think about it in terms of the Instagram worthiness or Pinterest worthiness, the unintended consequence can be these school safety concerns. I think you could still have all of the wonderful things that you've been inspired from Instagram and Pinterest, and just make sure I move them out of the way of the exit, right? I mean, don't you think?
But I guess I'm responding more to the pressure to have something that is window dressing that looks really good, as opposed to something more substantive that makes sense for kids, that makes sense academically for kids, or that makes sense from a safety perspective for kids. And I think oftentimes Pinterest, for example, has something that looks really good in theory, but in practice, that's not the way that it often looks. That's why I love the Pinterest fails that people have, where you go, yeah, that's what that would really look like if you tried to do that. Not to say, I'm sure there are, I don't want Pinterest to sue me. I'm sure there's delightful things there for people. But I guess if we are first and foremost prioritizing, what are the priorities in the classroom? The priorities in my classroom are safety, then academics, improving student outcomes, supporting students. And those things do not require matching plastic bins with a certain kind of font and a, paper streamers hanging, blah, 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 and, doing all these other things, So I think that if we are doing this thing because it makes sense for safety and it enhances the academic outcome of our students and it creates a welcoming, supportive environment, let's have at it. But to start at the other end of this looks good, and then, well, it kind of supports student learning, and well, it doesn't really hurt academic outcomes, is not the scale that I would prefer. I would prefer it to start with, this makes sense. This makes sense for safety. This makes sense for academics. This makes sense for student support. And so just looking at your room a little bit in terms of, we've seen a lot of rooms where the teacher makes this beautiful little alcove for themselves in the back, and there's, their desk and their coffee maker and their bookcase and their microwave and their refrigerator, and they've got their whole kitchen back there. And it really creates a sense of not being accessible to students, of like, I'm trying to shelter from the students. So I think just looking at it with a little bit of a critical eye of, what does this feel like as a kid? And maybe sit on the floor and look up and see what it looks like to see 700 bins stacked to the ceiling, towering over you, and so much stimulation and so much clutter that we sometimes see, that it's really difficult for kids to function, in addition to the safety concerns that it sort of begins to formulate. Yeah. I'm particularly interested in this kind of emerging body of research of sort of the impact of overstimulation and over decorating, whatever you want to call it, or over, I can't think of the word that I want without it sounding ridiculous, but where you have something on every surface, and the impact of kids, that they're not able to focus, they're not able to retain knowledge. And so there's kind of this, we've been personally in some of these more minimalist classrooms, and they're very relaxing and very homey and very sort of not so frantic, I guess.
Conducive to focus more so than stimulation.
Yeah, they're very focused and less frantic sometimes than some of the other ones. And so there is an impact on the social emotional, the climate and culture of that classroom, as well as the safety. So I think, I said this the other day and you made fun of me, but, I think it's sort of like, I can't remember who the famous fashion person is that says, get all dressed and then look at yourself in the mirror and take off two things. The earrings, the necklace, the bracelets, the rings, maybe take off one thing. So maybe look at your room and go, maybe we could scale back just this one thing.
Yeah. So I think to summarize, what I hear you say is that if the first priority is safety and student outcomes in terms of academics or emotional supports, that we can still make it look good.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think sometimes that doesn't come across. I think sometimes...
Well, I'm not saying you should have bare chairs bolted to the floor.
I just think sometimes in your being like approximately 100 years old and railing against Pinterest and Instagram, sometimes that gets lost. So I think it is really important that that the first priority is school safety and student outcomes. And then if you can and make that look good, which, you know what, if anybody can, it's teachers. Teachers can do that. Teachers can pull it off.
And I will have to say, in my own personal experience as an administrator, I know that I went into classrooms that looked great, and they were not student-centered. They were not supportive environments for kids. Kids didn't feel welcome there. It was very artificial. It was very staged, very contrived, and very overwhelming for kids. So, just because we can create a window dressing model of a classroom doesn't mean that it's always going to be what's best for our students. Now, clearly, I've also seen classrooms that were exactly the opposite, where it was too Spartan, too much like we don't care, too much like this is not a home. So there is that sweet spot in the middle. And I think sometimes, there is a pressure to make it look a certain way or to do a certain thing, rather than individuals sort of standing in that space and going, what do I want the student experience to be like here? And having that be more of a driver.
Yeah. Well, so the other one that I wanted to have, I guess, as my bingo square, I'm trying to commit to the conceit of this episode. Was one of the experiences that we had last week working with a school about and having some serious conversations about what does it mean if there is a disconnect between the folks at the organization in the district who are in charge of safety and security, right? If there is a security force or a director of security, and if there's a disconnect between sort of the safety and security side of the house and the academic side of the house. And sometimes that looks like a disconnect, a three-way disconnect, where we have leadership and we have the security people and we have faculty and staff or teachers. And there's sort of that, that meme of all the Spider-Mans, like pointing at each other. I feel like that's what we see a lot of times, where it is so hard to determine whose job is this, and that sometimes things fall through the cracks. A great example, we were in a school district where there was, we observed a pretty significant problem with students being out and about during instructional time. And it was very difficult to discern whose responsibility was it to get those kids where they were supposed to be in class. And I would postulate it's everyone's responsibility, but there was this strong sense in the schools of, well, the security people are supposed to do that. And the security people were like, we don't really have, this isn't really our role. We don't really build relationships with these students. That's not really what we've been charged to do. We're supposed to be security guards. That's really beyond our scope. The teachers felt like it was someone else's job. The administration was a little overtaxed with other things. And so I think that's a really important thing to reflect on, of have we so segmented the work of school safety that everybody is so siloed in what their job is. And I get it. We have really overextended people, especially coming out of the pandemic, but we can't have such distinct and discrete roles of what, the security people or the school-based law enforcement that we have, or the director of security, that those people are in charge of keeping us safe. And I'm a classroom teacher, and so I just think big thoughts. And there's, a lot of potential concerns in terms of climate and culture, in terms of needful things falling through the cracks if we adopt that really siloed mentality.
So your bingo square is to have some reaching across the aisle, or have some collaboration with people that are doing a job responsibility different from yours. Is that your square?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, ultimately, it's that safety is broadly defined all of our responsibility. So who carries out really specific day-to-day discrete tasks? Sure, that's maybe a discussion to have. But if I walk by a door and it's propped open and it's not supposed to be propped open, that doesn't mean I call for security to do it. It means I shut the door. And that's like a really low-level example, but that is indicative of a mentality that is someone else's job and someone else's responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing that we can discuss, at length in future episodes. But that was kind of something that really struck me last week.
Yeah. Well, my last bingo square is yours, actually, the one that you always talk about in terms of an evacuation field trip. Where
I do, I do love an evacuation field trip.
Yes, you do. Where you take a look around and find all those evacuation exits that you didn't necessarily know were there, either because you've never checked or because there's been some change in your status or in your building, and really sort of look at different ways that you could exit, and then sharing that with your students, but not necessarily in a scenario-based way, as Amanda talks about. Not like, okay, how do we get out of here if there was something, if a madman with a gun burst in? Instead, it's, how would we get out of here if we had to leave quickly? If we needed to leave the cafeteria quickly, how could we get out? Well, look, here's an exit that goes through the kitchen. Don't normally use it, but you should be aware that it's here. And then maybe physically walk the kids through that. Yeah. Trust me, on a hot afternoon in, the first couple days of school, you're going to be looking for an activity to get people up and walking around, and having them understand that as they move around the building, there are different ways to exit other than that front door that they walk in every single day, or that door that they walk out to go to the playground. And so getting kids to understand that there are different paths around the building, even taking different ways as you move going to specials or as you're moving around, and getting kids to understand that as they move around the building, there are a lot of different options for them. And we know tragically that this is put into place in numerous events where kids have to find a different way away from the danger. And if the only thing we have ever shown them is just one or two options, it really limits them, even to the point of teaching them to open both doors in a double door kind of situation so that you don't create this choke point of everybody trying to go out just one door that's open.
Now, if my bingo card said, how many times is Dr. Klinger going to say choke point, I got a bingo. So
I said, I think twice.
I'm going to declare myself a victory for this episode. So before we end, I have had a number of questions sent to us from people who view the podcast on YouTube. And the questions are always, what on earth is happening with all of the fun stuff behind us in our offices? So we're going to do an activity, which is wheel your chair back, pick a cool thing, and we're going to do quick show and tell. Are you ready?
Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you do it too.
Oh, me first?
Well, we both will wheel back and grab something.
Okay.
And then we'll do show and tell about it.
Yeah, except then I'm not dressed very nicely to be wheeling around. All right, here we go. And I'm back.
All right. What do you have?
I have this very cool drawing that my other daughter, who is an artist, made that for whatever reason I love. When I taught in elementary school, gifted ed, I feel like all my students look like this. I love them so much.
Okay. Well, actually, it's funny that you say that. Mine also has a connection to Allie. This is I think a license plate, one of those, like a metal thing that you hold your license plate. It is vintagey and antique, and it is actually from the estate of one of my favorite professors at Denison, Dr. Liska. He was my advisor when I got a degree in philosophy at Denison, and so Allie was in her professional capacity working with his estate, and so this was a gift from his widow to me. So it gets to sit behind me, which is a pretty neat little thing. So thank you to Allie, and thank you to Dr. Liska's family. So that's a nice one.
Well, so as we wrap this up, I want to give everyone a little bit of a pep talk. It is back to school. It's so exciting, but also the trepidation. Here's your opportunity to reignite those relationships with your students. Hang in there, stay in the field, stay in the moment. There is so much that you can do, and we will be here in the podcast to help you as you move through the year. So I guess the advertisement part is share this podcast with somebody that you think maybe needs to have that kind of support as well.
Yeah, and you can always head to the website, www.eschoolsafety.org. We have tons of free resources, lots of information. We're going to continue to do this, over the course of the year. If you have a question, you can always email us, info@eschoolsafety.org. If you have a specific, Dr. Klinger just gave a little pep talk. If you have some concerns or questions or something that's really bothering you or eating at you as you move into a new school year, and you want a specific pep talk for your specific situation, shoot us in. No, I'm not kidding. Like, I have this, and I just don't know how I would get my students. I'm on the second floor, and I'm real concerned about it. Shoot us an email, and we will do a specific pep talk for your specific situation. We'll put it on the podcast.
Maybe not a pep talk, but maybe help you solve that.
I like them both. We'll help you, and part of it will be a pep talk.
Okay.
So until next time, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.